Exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, Dead Men Walking starts
now.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Thanks for the reviews. You can always check us out on DMW187.com. We're not going to do a lot of shameless self-promotion today because we've got a guest on that who's been on before, and it was an absolutely phenomenal episode, very popular. You guys demanded him back, so we have him back. Attorney Davis Younts is a Christian husband, homeschool dad, attorney, and former military officer providing legal guidance and expert criminal defense to military, federal law enforcement, and other patriots. He's a former prosecutor, JAG, and #1 rated defense counsel in the Air Force. He now runs a focused legal practice helping Americans preserve their religious freedom, equal protection under the law, and basic constitutional rights in criminal and administrative proceedings. He's also been featured on Fox News with Tucker Carlson and other places in media. It is Mr. David Younts. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, brother. Great to be on again.
Yeah, glad to have you back. And we wanted to talk about something. We're just going to jump right into it. Usually we have a little chit chat. Hopefully our listeners know a little bit about you already. And guys, you can go back a few months and I'll post the other episode of Davis on so you guys can kind of get an idea of who he is and what he's all about. But brother in the Lord, constitutional attorney, former prosecutor. I mean, this guy's right up my alley. So we're excited to have him on. But we wanted to talk a little bit about Trump, the indictment, what's going on there. I've got a lot of questions on this, so I figure we'll dive right in. As you're an expert in legal matters. Now, you might not have all the answers to what's going on. Obviously, it's hard to kind of speculate from the outside when there's a case going on. But first and foremost, can you kind of give us a 30,000-foot overview of what is going on in this indictment and the other defendants? There's a couple people included in this.
Right. So, I think we have to kind of take a step back and just understand there's 4 different indictments, 4 different criminal prosecutions of President Trump going on right now. So the first of all was the New York case. That's a New York state law case where they're sort of looping in or trying to bootstrap in federal law in order to get around statutes of limitations and other things. So that's basically a financial reporting case. The second case to hit was the classified documents case. That's the Florida case. It's a federal prosecution for mishandling of classified documents. Then you have the DC case. The DC case is directly tied to January 6th and allegations of essentially being a part of an insurrection, although it's not really charged that way. The most recent indictment is the Georgia case. This is the one where we start hearing terms like RICO, racketeering. You have 19 defendants, including people like Attorney Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows. So that's kind of the most recent Georgia case that is charged as a conspiracy case for interfering with or allegedly trying to interfere with or overturn an election.
Okay, so the last two seem to be the ones that the media are focusing on the most right now. Could we very quickly, on those 4 that you just listed, in your professional opinion, each of those cases, how much weight do they hold? Are we going to see convictions on all 4 of those? And if so, how weighty of the convictions, in your opinion? Maybe just run through those 4, and then we'll dive into each of those individually.
Yeah, so the New York case, I think, is the weakest case. I was sort of surprised just from a prosecutor's perspective that was the one that went first. The reason I say that is it's sort of an untested prosecution theory that you can pull in federal campaign finance laws into state court to try to make them a felony and get around a statute of limitations. I think a fair judge could easily just dismiss that case in pretrial litigation. I'm not confident that's going to happen. The danger for Trump there, quite frankly, is just, can he get a fair jury in Manhattan? Will he get an impartial jury in that part of the country? Will he get a fair hearing? So I think that's probably the least of his problems, but it is concerning based on location. The case in Florida is again sort of an unprecedented attempt to come after a former president for the handling of classified documents. The reason for that is pretty practical. When you're president of the United States, you are the final authority when it comes to document classification. So there is this concept that the president of the United States can can rule that a document is now unclassified. The question in the case legally will be, was that done for some of these documents? Were there documents that slipped through that were still classified that he hadn't changed the classification for? The other questions will surround, what are his co-defendants? I think there are 2 right now co-defendants that have been named in that case. And one of them has already turned, I believe, and is working with the prosecution related to like deleting security footage and potential obstruction of justice. So in any case, as an attorney, when I hear obstruction of justice, I get concerned, because even if there's no conviction for the underlying crime, there's often in federal court convictions for obstruction of justice. So I do think the big takeaway from that case, the way to understand it, why I say it's unprecedented, is this. There's 2 laws at play. One goes back to Woodrow Wilson, World War I era. That's the Espionage Act. That's what they've charged him under. There's never congressional intent to charge a former or sitting president of the United States for that, unless it directly involved like selling secrets to a foreign adversary, particularly in a time of war. There is another act called the Presidential Records Act. That's the act that's designed to preserve presidential records for purposes of, historical record keeping for the National Archives. That statute is normally what we apply to all of these documents cases, and there's no criminal sanctions for it. So what's unprecedented about the Florida case is they're going back to, this Espionage Act and using it to go after a former president for mishandling classified documents. Vice President Pence mishandled classified documents. President Biden mishandled classified documents. No one is prosecuting them under the Espionage Act because what they did is covered under the Presidential Records Act. So again, that's why that case is so interesting. Again, I'm not sure how serious that case is long-term. I'm not sure what implications it would have for future electability and things like that, but it is a federal case. Now, the DC case.
Very quickly on that second case, 2 questions. One, does that case have any precedence anywhere else where a former president has been prosecuted in that way? And 2, just for people who don't know, and maybe you don't know, is there a process for a president to how they declassify documents? Is there steps that you're supposed to take, or can you just hold a piece of paper in your hand and go, this is now declassified?
Yeah. So on the first question, it is unprecedented. There hasn't been a use of the Espionage Act or anything like this to come after a former or sitting president. Just never been done before. As far as the process, really the president can set up their own process. So normally what happens is there's sort of a rulemaking process in place. The president say, this is how I'm going to handle classified documents. But really it is sort of a stroke of the pen situation. The president can ask for the information, review the information, get guidance, and then say, okay, with the stroke of the pen, I'm going to declassify these documents. That's why, there was a push during Trump's administration to declassify aspects of the Kennedy assassination that are still classified documents, or even like UFO records, things like that. There are people that are pushing for that because the president does have that kind of authority. Now, there's a lot they have to weigh in balance, but they can, with the stroke of a pen, change classification labels.
So there is a difference between, say, a Secretary of State, like a Hillary Clinton, deleting certain things, and a president maybe removing things because of that executive power that the president has. Not that I'm comparing one candidate or one person to the other, but they are different cases. When I have people come up to me, or you see on social media the 2 cases being compared, they are different just because of the position, aren't they?
Entirely different. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very different. And again, what we know about what Senator Clinton did was she had a private email server, and she was running official federal documents related to her federal job and position through that private server. So that not only created a security risk, but absolutely it created concerns with the handling of classified documents and other things.
Interesting. So how about this third case?
So the third case is the DC case. I will tell you, we know less about the details and facts around that case than the others, but it is related to the events of January 6th. So there, the prosecution is going to be trying to make some kind of a case that somehow President Trump was involved in, the acts that they call an insurrection or otherwise. Again, they're not really charging him with that, but they are charging him with events around it. I think they're going to have a difficult time with that case because I don't understand where they're going to go with intent when you have President Trump specifically saying things like peaceful, like make your voices heard, and even, going online to social media and saying, hey, stop what you're doing, back down. So that's a strange case to me. I think there's a lot of odd things legally about it, and we just don't know a lot yet. Not a lot has been released yet in that case. Again, probably difficult to find a fair jury there. The judge in that case, I think everyone should have concerns about the judge in that case. It's an Obama appointee. If you look at family history, her family has a history of individuals that started like the Communist Party in the Bahamas. But she's also set the initial trial date for March 4th of 2024, which is the day before Super Tuesday. So if you
Wow.
looked at a calendar for a presidential candidate and said, hey, what's the worst date for someone who's running in a Republican primary to start their trial? The day before Super Tuesday would be a
Yeah.
good answer to that question.
Be a pretty political date, it seems like, when judges are supposedly supposed to be impartial in our system. In the last case, what do we have?
So the Georgia case, I think, is very interesting for a lot of reasons. One reason is that Georgia law is very, very strict about the ability to issue a pardon. So this is not a case, if there's a conviction in Georgia, this is not a case where President Trump or the next president could necessarily issue a pardon. So I think that's one thing to just, okay, this is different than a federal case. And it's even very difficult for the governor of Georgia to issue a pardon. So it's not that simple. So that's just one thing to know legally as we think about the posture of the case. The other thing about the case is this is a RICO case or a racketeering case. What are we even talking about when we say that? What we have to do is we have to think about the mob. RICO statutes were designed to take down mafia rings and mafia kingpins, right? So this is the idea that everyone involved in a quote unquote conspiracy is criminally liable for the things that other people also involved in the conspiracy do. So like when I try to explain this to clients or to other people, it's almost like, spokes from a wheel. There's this conspiracy and everyone is connected to it. If you can draw a line back to the interior of that wheel, and everyone's part of a spoke. So the federal government and states have used this for a long time to increase potential penalties for like low-level drug dealers, mafia drivers, and things like that, to say, hey, you're responsible for all kinds of things, all kinds of large amounts of money laundering or drugs because you're involved in a larger conspiracy. So you may have just been a mule, you may have just been a driver, but you're responsible in some part for this huge criminal operation. And when you do that, the potential exposure in terms of fines and years in prison gets so much higher. And that's why you see even formerly loyal members of the mob ratting out the kingpins, because they're facing, 30, 40 life in prison, even though they were only involved at a lower level. They're responsible for things that the entire conspiracy engaged in. So that's big picture, right? Right. Like that's what they've done. So the issue in the Georgia case is you have essentially 19 people, including lawyers, who were taking steps to either get a recount done in Georgia, to investigate potential voter fraud in Georgia, particularly in Fulton County, to try and get elected officials to engage in their job of reviewing what happened on election night, where were these ballots coming from, and other things. So taking these steps to do this, and anyone involved in those phone calls, in those efforts, legal and otherwise, and I say otherwise meaning political efforts, pressure efforts to do anything about the election results in Georgia, they are now charged as part of this conspiracy.
Wow. So two quick questions on that last case. One, just on a side note, what is your opinion of the constitutionality of RICO? Do you believe it falls within, I guess, constitutional law to be able to prosecute that way? Yes or no? I'm vaguely familiar with honestly, the only thing I know about RICO is when I watch, Martin Scorsese films on Goodfellas. So I'm not an attorney.
Right.
So I'm familiar with RICO and how they do that. But is there constitutionality to being able to increase someone's penalties just because of potential or being part of a bigger thing? And then, and then two, why would we be prosecuting RICO on someone who's just trying to, essentially, in my opinion, look into election integrity? What is the excuse they have for prosecuting RICO on something that I would think would be legal to do?
Right. So, the RICO, real quickly on the RICO statute, I think that, from a legal standpoint, from a case law precedent standpoint, over and over again, it's been deemed constitutional in our
Okay.
system. Right. So that's what the courts have ruled over and over again. My concern with RICO statutes is always the increasing exposure of liability for individuals who really aren't responsible for the entire conspiracy. And I do think, like, intent matters. And my understanding of history is the RICO statutes were designed in part to put incredible pressure on low-level people to rat out others and to make
Mm,
it easier for the government to get convictions. So I am a skeptic of any legislative scheme that is designed to make it easier for the government to get convictions in any case. So
mm,
while RICO has been deemed legal over and over again, I have concerns about it, and I do think
sure.
it creates real problems in sentencing. So that's a little bit of an aside, right? Just understanding the framework that we're dealing with. But it is, the best example is mafia movies. Go back and watch those, and you'll start to understand RICO to some extent. Um, as far as what's happening in Georgia, here's the thing I think that we have to start with is we just have to ask the question, what was the intent of President Trump? What was the intent of the attorneys that were involved in this case? Was their intent to legally challenge or even legally question the election results that were being reported in Georgia, or was it something else? And the simple answer is, if what they were trying to do was use every legal political means to call into question potential fraud in an election, where is the crime in that? And
Yeah.
and I will say this, I do think everything in the case rises and falls on intent. And I think that's where the prosecutor is going to have a very difficult time proving intent, right? What
Yeah.
was the intent? If the intent was to use every legal and political process our system allows for to challenge the results of an election, this is what we do when we think there might be election fraud, then there was no crime. Are they going to try and say that what they were doing is they were, intentionally committing illegal acts to interfere with the outcome of election? I don't see how they get there, but there is some precedent. I mean, you've seen this question in Michigan came up. I don't know if you've been following the case in Michigan, but it is relevant to the Georgia case because in Michigan there was a group of local election officials that got together and they created what we would call an alternate slate of electors. In other words, they said, hey, we think there was fraud in Michigan. And so we're
Mhm.
going to nominate an alternative slate of electors from the state of Michigan so that if the results are challenged, there's this alternative slate that's available. All the people involved with that have been charged with a federal crime for election interference in Michigan,
Mm. And
including,
is
85-year-old election officials from a local county. So, there's this new precedent coming out. We talk about unprecedented. All this is unprecedented, certainly, but there is a new precedent of it's not just censorship on social media or mainstream media when we talk about election results and potential election fraud. Now it is a crime to try to take steps that legal scholars would say throughout time would be legitimate things to consider as an option to challenge the outcome of an election and calling it a crime.
Mm. So, I mean, in your opinion, it sounds like you're saying some other attorneys as well are saying it is legal to what they did in Michigan, for instance, would have been legal to make an alternative slate, and now we're kind of seeing a new precedent set saying no, it's not. Uh, is that just because there's a gray area there? It's never been done, and now we're making opinions based on actions retroactively. Sometimes the law seems to work that way. If it's not specifically laid out, I feel like sometimes judges can legislate from the bench because they're interpreting it however they see fit when it's not very specific. Is that kind of, in your view, what's happening in Michigan?
Yeah, and in my opinion, the Michigan case is an example of exactly that. I don't see anything that suggests any of the individuals involved in that case had any intention to try to, unlawfully overturn an election or do anything illegal. They were going along with a legal theory, somewhat unprecedented, but a new theory of the law that says, hey, states have the ability to decertify their election results, states have the ability to say, no, that there was a fraud, there was an issue of fraud, there was a problem with this. We are going to put together another slate of electors. And we can talk a
Hmm.
little bit more about how that works, because it is interesting. There is a way to do it right. And so again, it's a question of intent. And this is where, two things we see in our legal system now that are a problem in these cases. Sure, it's judges legislating from the bench, but we failed to grasp the importance of the political affiliations and the political motivations of prosecutors. That's at a federal level when we talk about United States attorneys. That's at a county level when we talk about voting for our local DAs. Our system is designed in such a way that prosecutors, U.S. attorneys, local county DAs have tremendous discretion
Yeah.
in charging individuals. And listen, in some respects, even being charged with a crime and having go through the process is a punishment, right? It is an upheaval in your life, even if you're completely innocent, to have to
Yeah.
go through, certainly the federal, but the state, criminal process. So that's a huge issue that we need to pay attention to. The other issue that's happened in the case law, that's happened over time, that's happened with judges, is this: is we have gone away from one of the foundational principles of our legal system, which is something called jury nullification. Okay. And jury nullification is exactly what it sounds like. Our founders, Thomas Jefferson, said that the only anchor yet imagined in the mind of man by which a government can be held to the principles of its constitution is the jury, right?
Mm.
The only anchor. And so the whole idea is juries are supposed to have the authority to nullify the government's prosecution. In other words, juries are supposed to have the authority to apply the law and the facts and to say, hey, there may be some legal technicality where you're going to convict this person, but we do not believe that is the right or the just thing. So we're going to acquit this person regardless of the facts of the law in this case, right? And that was a protection against government overreach and against
Mm.
laws that a jury finds unconscionable and objectionable and inappropriate. Judges hate that, right? And
Sure.
we've gone away from that. In most places, an attorney can get into big trouble for even sort of trying to argue jury nullification. I think one state still has a nullification statute on the books that allows for it. But I just say that we have taken authority and power away from our juries as well, which is an important thing in the system and in the process. So
Mm.
on that aside, as we look at this, what we're dealing with in Georgia as well is unprecedented. And the question is, how do you properly challenge election results, and what was it that was done wrong? And I think one defendant to watch closely in the Georgia case is attorney Jenna Ellis, right? A
Okay.
very, very good attorney. She represented John MacArthur's church in California during the
Oh, okay.
COVID shutdowns. They won that. They got a huge settlement. Phenomenal attorney, a very good person. She was hired by the Trump team to work on some of these cases. She was tangentially involved with some of the things that happened in Georgia. Impeccable reputation. Highest ethical character. All of that. Not a political operative in by any means. And now she's charged in this case, and she's going to have difficulty finding an attorney to represent her. She's going to have to spend $500,000, $750,000, $1 million to get legal representation in a criminal case, because now that attorneys are being charged, Rudy Giuliani was acting in the capacity of an attorney for Trump. Now that attorneys are being charged, no one wants to represent them, right? People don't want to represent them. They're hesitant to represent them because now all of a sudden is their license going to be in jeopardy? And we've
Sure.
seen that. Hasn't been talked about a lot, but a lot of attorneys put their license at risk if they filed any kind of a challenge against the election
Wow.
this last go around. So those
Yeah.
are sort of some of the issues that are collateral to this, but that are really important, and we need to be thinking very, very carefully about, because it's very, very dangerous if we have a legal system that makes it extremely difficult for people to find adequate representation, especially when we're talking about a criminal case.
Yeah, I mean, that's extraordinary. So in my pessimistic view, I look at things like Georgia and Michigan and I go, what a great way to quell any type of real election integrity kind of action by really just going far and beyond what probably needs to be done by charging these defendants. I mean, these are, like you said, 80, 85-year-old retirees that just went, hey, I just want to make sure, the Democrats go vote over there and the Republicans vote over there, and poll watchers and all these things. And now they're being charged with federal felonies. That just seems a little political to me, and which kind of gets me into my next point of asking. Obviously, you're nationally renowned attorney, you're prosecutor, JAG. I mean, you have the credentials. So, politics aside, you and I probably have similar politics, but not on everything. So, let's take that out of the equation. Just from an expert in the law, when you look at these cases, do you feel that there is some political motivation here, or do you go, no, there's merit on all of them, barely any merit? Like when you look at these and your attorney brain is filing through these, what do you think's going on here? Because it seems pretty extraordinary to the average person.
So I would say this, trying to be somewhat objective, politics aside, trying to be somewhat objective. I don't see the legal justification for any of these cases. I really, really don't.
Mm.
I think it is an abuse of prosecutorial discretion, and I do think it is 100% political. And I don't say that lightly. Listen, if it's not political, why would the federal judge even entertain the possibility of setting the trial date for March 4th, the day before Super Tuesday? In one of the other cases, I think it's the Georgia case, they're initially trying to set the trial date for March 4th, the day before Super Tuesday. There's a judge in New York. There was the E. Jean Carroll case, which was a civil case for damages over an alleged sexual assault, right, and defamation and all of that. Do you know when the judge has set the hearing to determine what damages are to be paid by Trump in that case?
No, what is it?
The 15th of October, the same day, maybe my date's wrong, but it's the same day as the Iowa caucus, the day of the
Wow.
Iowa caucus, right? So, so again, we don't have to put blinders on to say there
Yeah.
is questions about, the political nature of this. And in the Georgia case, very, very particular, listen, what is the intent? That's going to be my question. Any defense attorney for these individuals has to go back to that and ask that. What was the intent? What was the intent of their client in doing what they did in Georgia? And if it was
Yeah.
to do the best they could with some gray areas of the law in order to try to challenge an election that they believe was fraudulent, was truly fraudulent, illegal, then what was the crime? So imagine this. I mean, in the Georgia case, Trump's defense may well be, no, I thought there was election fraud. I truly, sincerely believed there was election fraud and illegal things happened, and I was doing what I could on the advice of attorneys as best as we could at the time to challenge that. If
Yeah.
that is true, if that's his sincere belief, then he had no criminal intent and the conspiracy falls apart.
Yeah, which does happen, by the way. I've said this for a couple years on our on the podcast. People say, "Oh, if you say election fraud, it's conspiracy theory." Well, I live in Michigan. In 2012, we had a county clerk sentenced to 6 years in prison for dumping ballots and changing out voting machines in
Right,
2012. So
right,
that does happen. There is election fraud. There are people that are fraudulent and break the law in positions of power. And I'm for election integrity. It is kind of the foundation on which our country and constitution is founded, is the right to be able to vote and have people and be represented that way. So that does happen. With that being said, too, let's move past then the cases that you've laid out so beautifully for us. Let's look into the future a little bit. Is this one, let's get a little political. Is this one going to affect Trump, do you believe? I mean, the guy's polling at, I don't know what it was, 70% last time I looked. He said, I'll run from jail if I have to. So is there political ramifications for him? I do know that you laid out, look at, there's only one of them that can't be pardoned. The other ones could. And that's a theory people have. Look, he could just pardon himself if he
right.
believes these are fraudulent. And so is there political ramifications for that? And two, we're in new territory then. If you have someone running for president being prosecuted, how does that work? What if he does win and next thing we know he's reporting to a jail cell or something? It seems so, we're in new territory here. What do you think is going to happen? I know you can't tell the future, but in your
Right.
best, kind of in your best estimate, what is it for Trump going forward? And even these defendants, which it seems to be very sad. You have 10 or 20 between the cases that, like you said, spending money that they don't have on something that seems frivolous or doesn't have legal standing.
Right. So I will caveat my political opinions on some of this stuff with saying I voted for Trump twice, right? So
Okay.
I voted for Trump twice. And so I just start out with saying that. But I will say this: my concern for Trump is there was no strategy in place. There was no infrastructure in place to actually challenge the election results the way it should have been. And I'm not talking
Mm,
about legal, illegal, but I'm talking about the hard work to create a legitimate infrastructure of attorneys, boots on the ground, ready to go. Most of the challenges that were made were untimely, and that's why they got tossed out, right?
yeah.
So it wasn't that there was ever a vetting by any court. I mean, let's just get this straight. No one has seriously in litigation really taken a look at the election results from anywhere in the last presidential election. It didn't happen. All the cases were thrown out before they got to the merits, right?
Yeah.
That's just the reality. So when we say there was no election fraud, the answer is we don't know. Now, in some respects, the legal team and the legal strategy of Trump is to blame for that. So my caveat to this is, what is the big picture legal and political strategy for Trump moving forward? These indictments create a lot of loyalty. They have a lot of us, and I feel this way. They're going after him. They're going after him politically. It's unfair what's happening. This is partiality. This is not equal justice. This offends my sensibilities as a Christian, as an
Sure.
attorney. However, what is he using it for beyond fundraising, and what is his end game? What is his plan with these cases, and how do we look at this moving forward? So I have grave concerns that no matter what, it's going to take away from his ability to campaign effectively. And that's unfortunate. And I do think, might be wrong. This is speculation, but I do think part of the reason why he did not participate in the debate was because his attorney said, you can't. In that
Right.
kind of a
Yeah.
setting where you can't have no control over topics, you have no control over questions, where other candidates are going to be looking for an opportunity to try to get you to say something inappropriate, and you have these cases pending, criminal cases pending, to have lawyers advising
Yeah.
him, you can't go and speak in that kind of a setting, in that forum, would not surprise me at all. So that's one of my questions as well. What can he say? What is he going to be advised not to say? And again,
Right.
if he is in a civil damages hearing litigation on the day of the Iowa caucus, how is he campaigning the day before, the week before? If he's, going to be in trial, preparing for a trial the week of the day before trial starting, the day before Super Tuesday, how is he going to be out effectively campaigning? So there are grave concerns on that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I do understand that, but at the same time, I look at the debates and 23 million people tuned in, and then he goes out the very next day and goes over to your buddy Tucker on
That's right.
X, Twitter X, and it's 265 million people watch it. I mean, 10
Right.
times the amount of what watched the other candidates, and I just look and I go, I mean, will it harm him really though? I mean, I know there's questions, but you go, this guy, I mean, he's a marketing genius. He is. Okay. And we're not
Yeah.
here to just praise Trump for everything. I
Right.
think he does some things that are wrong too. I voted for him twice as well. But at the same time, you go, I don't know if he can be stopped. I think if you, I mean, look at his mugshot went viral, for crying out loud. I mean, it
Right.
bolstered. He gained 10 points in the polls after a mugshot. I'm like, could you imagine what happens if indicted or arrested or a conviction comes down on on Super Tuesday or whatever? It doesn't seem to be harming him too much, just because honestly, I think what you've just laid out in the last 30 minutes, the lay person in America, even if, independent, Republican, soft conservative, whatever, they have the same feeling that this is, this is kind of BS, for lack of a better term, because they also lived through right after the 2020 election, the whole Democratic Party saying, "Oh, we have the Steele dossier and we have election interference," and they did exactly what some of these people are being charged with or accused of, is election interference. They did it for almost 2 years, and we see zero from that. I don't know if we want to go to that, but I would be interested to know, why haven't we seen any type of prosecutions out of something making up a file, spying on another candidate, and then creating a whole story around it that says, oh, Russian bots and Russian this and Russian that, and all of it fake. Well, 99% of it. There might have been a little bit, but the majority of it fake. So I think the layperson looks at that and goes, okay, we had all this craziness over here, nothing happens. And then we have this potential maybe gray area over here. And now we're in, RICO and 4 different cases in 3 different states. And it just seems for the average American that they look at that and they might even vote for Trump out of spite against the injustice that they see at the federal level. That's what I get when I talk to people. They go, I'll vote for him just because we know what they're doing. The evil is not Trump. The evil is this federal government, this second shadow government, if you will, of bureaucrats that really truly run the country sometimes.
Right. And it's, I do think you're right there. So I don't see a path for anyone else to win in a Republican primary against Trump. I think, he has an extremely loyal base, and there is a significant percentage of people that are looking at this and going, maybe I didn't vote for Trump before, maybe I didn't understand him, maybe I don't even like him, but this injustice is so extreme. Yeah. If we allow it to happen to him, it can happen to anyone, and we're not going to stand for that. So I definitely see that. Listen, I was reading something the other day that says 15% of independents who voted for Biden have said they would not have voted for him had they known the truth about Hunter Biden's laptop and that whole story. Now, just think about that for a second. That was an investigation that was intentionally withheld in cooperation with the White House, the federal government, the Department of Justice. They all intentionally suppressed that story of the criminal activity that was captured on that laptop. I mean, heinous things we're talking about, right? Yeah. And now we can look back and you have 15% of independents, and who knows how accurate this polling is. Statistics are what they are. But you have this poll that shows that significant of a percentage of independents would not have voted for Biden had they known the truth about that laptop. And you go, how is that not election interference? How is the Russian collusion? Right. How is that not election interference? And the answer is it absolutely is. But unfortunately, what we have to be cautious of now is we are learning that, just like we've seen in tyrannical regimes in the past, communist regimes, whatever power, whatever party is in power is now using that to persecute and prosecute their political enemies. That is what we're seeing with Trump. Yeah. There's no question about that. Look at where these cases are being brought. Look at who's bringing them. It is absolutely, this is not legal logic that is causing this to be a necessary prosecution. I mean, the amount of money that's going to go into a trial of 19 people in Fulton County, Georgia. I mean, imagine a trial that's going to last 4 months or longer, potentially. Imagine the cost that goes into that for a county. Are you telling me that makes sense? Like, that's what's going to keep the people of Fulton County, Georgia safe when they're in their homes at night or they're walking down the street in downtown Atlanta? No, it's not. It's actually going to be a huge distraction, and crime is going to be running rampant. So you do have to ask the question, why is this being done? Yeah. And that's not the right answer. I mean, and I don't want to go off on a tangent on this, but the other question is, how do we stop it? Right? Like, how do we politically say, okay, this cannot happen? What do we do? And I think there's kind of 2 pieces to that I'd love to talk about as well, if we have time to do that.
No, let's do it. Let's get into that. And then we'll wrap up. What are the 2? Because I'm in the same boat you are. Here's the thing. The Democrats can use it as a political tool. The established Republicans would do the same thing if they were in power. I look at it from the 30,000-foot view and go, this isn't good for the constitutionality and this individual citizen. This is a bad thing across the board. Yes, we don't want certain people to be prosecuted and presidential candidates, but if we start using political sway to prosecute our enemies, I mean, that's third world stuff. So there's larger issues, foundational issues, constitutional issues at play here than just, well, they're going against my guy and now we need to go against their guy. It's like, this is a much bigger thing. So what do we do? What are those 2 things that you mentioned?
So I think the first, we have to look at elections. When we look at elections, what we have to look at is what authority do states have to actually, properly regulate, properly understand the election process, and what can a state legislature and a governor do if there are concerns about fraud in an election. This did not happen last time, but I'll just use Pennsylvania as an example because I'm here in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania state legislature had the legal authority to come in, call a special session, do an investigation, and then say, hey, we have concerns about the election, about potential fraud. They could have done that. And at the time, there was a Republican majority in both houses of the state legislature in Pennsylvania. The problem is the way Pennsylvania law is written, it was too difficult to call a special session without approval of the governor, and it was a Democrat governor, right? Terrible Democrat governor. Okay, so even the Republicans with the majorities could not do that. That's a really important change that I think any red state, if you will, should be looking at. What capability do we have as the state who has the authority to carry out our election process within our state? What can we do in the future to do this well? And the answer is special sessions to actually dig into what happened and trying to figure out if there were irregularities and what to do about it. And then the state legislature could elect a different slate of electors. Okay.
Yeah.
So I do think there are reforms. Some of them actually have to be constitutional reforms in how a special session is called. But I do think we need to be looking hard at the state level at potential reforms so that state legislators can go and exercise their power. And I do think that's really, really important. In a constitutional republic with a federal system, we should not be looking for Congress, the federal Congress, to step in and do some sort of, sweeping election law changes. That would be the worst possible outcome, because then the federal government's going to be centralizing everything, and that's going to get worse. So we are better off with state control over elections. That's really important. But that's the issue. And it raises the issue we're going to see. It's going to continue to happen, which is at the state level, many of these states are going to try and remove Trump from the ballot. Some are going to wait until after the primary so that he is the Republican candidate, but they're going to try to use whatever means they can to remove him from the ballot. So whether they say he's ineligible because he's a convicted felon under state law, he cannot be on the ballot, or whether they try to use the 14th Amendment to say he was participating in an insurrection or a rebellion, therefore he cannot run, they're going to try to do that. I think it's very shaky legal ground, but it's just something to pay attention to and be aware of. But the first solution is state level, a resurrection of strong state legislatures who are serious about the kinds of election reforms that matter. And then we need to be able to call a special session in order to potentially challenge fraud in election results and actually do it right before it even gets sent to Congress. And we have to rely on the federal government to deal with, very, very removed information and deal with slates of electors that have already been endorsed by the state legislature and sent to Congress. So that's one. The other piece of this, getting away from election, just looking at, sort of runaway prosecutions, what we need to do is we need to be honest about how we view, crime and punishment as conservatives, as Christians. We need to understand what that looks like. So I said it before, but I'll say it again. We, more than ever, and you appreciate this at the county level so much because of what you do, but we need to be involved in understanding and vetting our district attorneys at the local level. Sure, it's harder to understand who U.S. attorneys are. That's bigger. That's a bigger level. But even at the local level, we need to be involved, at any time where you have the opportunity as a voter to be involved in the selection of a district attorney. We've heard a lot of people talk about local sheriffs, right? The importance of the county sheriff, the lesser magistrate. But district attorneys, we're learning, are incredibly, incredibly important. And look, we missed this. Barack Obama and George Soros, here I go sounding like a conspiracy theorist, right? But what they did is they invested millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars into local district attorney elections. Since 2014, they have been pouring millions of dollars into these elections. So imagine a small county in Michigan where, all of a sudden they decide, hey, we're going to target Calhoun County, Michigan, and we're going to say, listen, we're going to dump $10 million of outside money into a DA's race. You don't think that's going to swing a DA's race? Absolutely it will. Absolutely it will. And that's what they did. And so now they're bearing the fruit of that. They're seeing situations where they can go after political opponents because the district attorneys are bought and paid for, or at least are communists or sympathetic to federal government control and tyranny in that way. So we have to be engaged. We can't miss the importance of that when we start thinking about political solutions, because My fear is if we don't have safe, fair elections and people lose hope in the election process, things get very dangerous. And I don't care what nation you're in, but if people feel truly disenfranchised, that's unfortunately when things can become violent because people lose faith in the process.
Yeah. We'll finish this up here with one more question, but I just want to make a comment. It is funny that ironical that you mentioned that, because I remember seeing, I think it was 2014. I remember seeing an infographic on kind of a conservative website, and it was saying how the Democratic Party is kind of upset with Obama because he's lost all these state seats across the country, right? Like 860 blue state reps and state senators have been flipped to red. And then and they focused on that and said, oh, they don't like him. He's losing these local elections. And then the graphic right next to it then showed Republican or Republican leaning and nonpartisan judges and prosecutors for conservative leaning were down, and Democrats had almost doubled the judges and the prosecutors. And I remember reading that in 2014, and I wish I could find the Facebook post on it that I made. And I just went, so we gain the people making the laws, but the people enforcing the laws and who can bring a judgment against you are now all liberal. And it's kind of what you're just saying now. I didn't know that they were spending that money in those races, but it showed. They went, okay, well, if we can't make the laws, we'll just have the people that are prosecuting and interpreting the laws, which is really a great end game if you think about it politically, because we're seeing it now play out in all these cases. But as we wrap this up here, I want your personal opinion on something, because I've heard a lot of different answers to this. Because when you look at this legally, it seems like a lot of this is on shaky ground. Obviously, I mean, even the most diehard liberal or Democrat can go, yeah, there's some political stuff going on here. Okay, I don't think that's even arguable at this point. Why Trump? Why prosecute him? Do they fear him that much? Do they think he's going to do something crazy in a second term? Do they just not like him? I mean, why target him so hard, so politically? And I'm 42. I started paying attention, I think, to Dukakis Bush when I was like 8, right?
Right.
I've never seen someone be so politically persecuted, or have a political group that was so anti one person, or I don't know if the right word is scared or intimidated or what it is. But why Trump, do you think, in all this targeted political and legal cases?
I do think there is absolute merit to the concept that he didn't owe anyone anything when he took office. And so he was not beholden to a particular political party. He was not beholden to any agencies. He was not controlled opposition, if you will.
That's a
Right.
good
And
point.
and again, we don't have to go too far into conspiracy theories to understand the fact. Look, I served in the military for 20 years. Like, there are long-standing, long-term bureaucrats, administrative
Yes.
agencies in DC, whether
Yes.
it's the CIA or the Department of Justice, whether it's the FBI, where people vie for political control, right? They
Mm.
vie for political control, and they want their friends in power. They want people they can control and influence in the White House. Trump got there, and for better or worse, he didn't bring in the traditional advisors. He did bring in
Yeah.
outside advisors. Some of them were terrible, some of them were great, but that
Yeah.
type of upheaval is just abhorrent to the political system that exists in DC, and it does threaten the normal power structure.
Mm.
So whenever
Yeah.
you bring in someone like that, they're going to react poorly to it. And again, this gets back to conspiracy theories, but look at, the CIA certainly had reasons why both of the Kennedys needed to be out of the picture long term. And we still don't have all the answers on that, right? But they
Yeah.
did. They stopped listening. President Kennedy stopped listening to the CIA and the defense establishment after the Bay of Pigs. That's just documented,
Yeah.
known historical fact. And so there were those in the government that were ready to, to use anything they could against them. We know that as the former director of the FBI, Hubert Hoover had files on everyone, right? He had
Yeah.
blackmail files on everyone. So I do think, in some respects, while maybe there are character questions and other things, Trump was a true outsider.
Yeah. And, I think that's proven by the fact that 9 out of 10 elected officials that run or candidates, what's the one thing they always say? I'm an outsider. I'm it right, right. So they
Right.
understand that there's an issue, even if they're not saying it. And then I also laugh when they say I'm an outsider, and then you go look at their campaign finance filings, and it's like, $12 million from big pharma, and $8 million PAC from this lobby. So Vivek's coming to mind there, which I watched him early, and not to get into the political thing, but watch him, and then you go, yeah, he's scrubbing stuff with on Wikipedia, and
Right.
he's outsider. I don't know. I mean, in my lifetime, I've only seen a few real outsiders, probably Trump, probably Ron Paul at some point, where
Right.
and they're all kooky. Probably
Right.
Ross Perot.
Right.
I'm showing my age now. There's only one or two every 20 years where you really go, yeah, this guy doesn't really care about your money or your dinners or your lobbyists or the pats on the back or the smiles and like, no, he's just, I'm going to do what I think is best. And I think Trump was probably the most well-funded that was willing to do that, and the marketing genius that he is. But
Right.
give us some final thoughts here, and then also let the people know what you got going on, where they can find you. We'll make sure we link all this up so they can find you on social media. But final thoughts, and what do you got going on?
Yeah, I would say just, my final thought for all of this is we need revival. We need churches
Amen.
that are ready to engage at a local level in their community. Everything, all of life, the Bible, all of scripture for all of life. That's what we need. I think the loss
Amen.
of that in our society is why we're even in this situation in the first place. We cannot put faith and hope in political leaders. The nation of Israel got the king they deserved in Saul, right? Not not what God had planned or intended for them. And I think we need to learn from that and be very careful about that. So that's my biggest call is, churches and Christians, don't hide your head in the sand. Don't pretend this isn't going to come to your front door if you just ignore it. We have to change that mentality. And as far as what's on the horizon, we, during COVID, we started a nonprofit organization called Stand With Warriors. That is going to be relaunching in October. It's Stand With Warriors. The website isn't ready for the reboot yet, but it's coming. We're going to be very, very focused on evangelism and discipleship in the military, as well as providing the right kind of legal guidance for Christian leaders in the military.
Hmm.
And so it's going to be our own way of bringing the gospel to the deep state. That's our hope with that. So that's something right now. The action there is just pray for me, pray for some of the former Navy SEALs and pastors that are going to be involved with that project. But look for that in the future. Otherwise, folks can follow me on Twitter at Davis Younts on Twitter. Our website is yountzlaw.com. We're working hard to try to just address issues, legal issues from a Christian perspective. And of course, we're very, very busy representing military members all over the world. Some Christians, others that we're just trying to show the light of Christ by ensuring they get a fair trial in a very, very difficult time. So that's our heartbeat.
Awesome. Beautiful. I love it. And we'll make sure we link all that up when the episode goes live. So if they need to contact you for anything, it looks like at the beginning of the show too, I used my Michigan accent and I did not say your name correctly. I said Younts instead of Younts. So I apologize for that. But we'll make sure we get it all linked up. Davis, thank you so much for taking time out, explaining this, being so articulate with us. I know I've had a lot of people reach out and say, what's your opinion on this? What do you think legally? I have my opinions. I'm not an attorney. I'm a realtor. So, a dumb attorney, as we would say. But I appreciate you coming on and explaining these things and talking about these things. I think it's just good to kind of know what's going on there. So, Davis, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate you, brother. God bless.
Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. As always, we appreciate your feedback, your comments, visiting dmwpodcast.com, checking out what we got going on there. We have a merch site too you can check out. We got some fun new stuff on there for you that helps support the show. We're going to be at Fight Laugh Feast next month. We're going to be doing some live stuff from the Builders Conference from Christ the Word in Michigan. And then we have conferences in February coming up where I'll be moderating a Why Calvinism documentary. We'll keep you updated on all that stuff. And then in the coming weeks, too, I think we've just confirmed Chris Larson as well from Ligonier is going to be on and talking about what I sign off with every week, which is the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Stick around for those shows as well. Thanks, guys. God bless. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Dead Men Walking Podcast for full video podcast episodes and clips, or email us at deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.
None your business.